Then we have John Riddell, who will be known to many of you as the editor and translator of many of the congresses of the Comintern. And he will be speaking on the workers' government, fiction, pseudonym, or transition.
Bear with me, and if you can't hear me, stick up your hands. I've given some talks on the Fourth Congress that I had the pleasure of helping to publish this year. And surprisingly often, the discussion period becomes a debate about the question of the workers' government, with obsessive contention from many points of view. And so I decided today I would speak on that for what it's worth. I was able to publish some documents on this in the Fourth Congress, which I think will enable us all not to resolve our differences, but to raise these differences to a higher level and carry on the debate. And in discussing this, I would like to start in Greece. If united, the left-wing anti-austerity parties in Greece could have won the election last week and formed a government. The leading left party, Syriza, called for a left government, a government that would rule in the present parliamentary and capitalist framework. Now, there is also in Greece a coalition of far-left groups called Antarsia, which I have links with through two of their affiliates. And Antarsia attacked the left government perspective, saying that it was a sellout to a capitalist perspective. And Antarsia called for an insurrection to achieve workers' power and to carry out an anti-capitalist revolution. Now, these two concepts of a left government ruling within the present framework and an insurrection to establish workers' power, they confront each other as across a chasm, one of them walled into the present, the other locked in an inscrutable future. Is there any way to link that present to that future? In the words of the Third Congress of the Communist International, to find a bridge between the present demands of the working class and the socialist program of the revolution. Lenin's Comintern certainly thought there was. It affirmed the possibility of a workers' government, by which they did not mean just simply the concept of workers' rule, but something specific. That is, a government that would initially start off ruling while the capitalist state, or most of it, was still around, but would carry out radical measures to dismantle that state and begin a revolutionary transformation. Now, this concept has been criticized for many Marxists, and was at the time, including in the Comintern, on the grounds that it creates illusions into what is possible within capitalism. Most English language discussion, however, focused on a preliminary draft of a resolution on this question submitted to the Fourth Congress that differs substantially from what the Congress finally adopted. That in itself may be worth revisiting this question. You can read the successive drafts on the Workers' Revolution question in the Fourth Congress book, and also on my website, which is johnriddell.wordpress.com. Go and have a look. Today, I'm not going to read from the documents. I'm just going to say what I think was at stake in this. During the Fourth Congress, at the end of 1922, two speakers said that the Bolsheviks had used the workers' government concept in Russia in 1917. One of them was Trotsky, I think. Firstly, when they called on the Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries to break with the bourgeoisie and take the power. And then later, when the Bolsheviks themselves joined with the left socialist revolutionaries and formed an alliance based on the Soviets to form a Soviet government. But only those two mentions. Most of the Congress discussion on the workers' government focused on Germany, where the term had first been raised by the workers' movement during a general strike against an attempted right-wing coup in 1920. The main trade union federation proposed formation of a government of all socialist parties and unions, excluding the bourgeois parties, and resting on the strike movement, and proposed that such a government could take effective action against right-wing putschists. The German Communist Party stated that though it had no confidence in those proposing this measure, that under certain conditions, formation of a socialist government of this type would create extremely favorable conditions for vigorous action by the proletarian masses, and expressed conditional approval of that proposal. And a heated debate broke out in the German party and in the Comintern as to whether this stand was appropriate, and that debate continues today. We should notice, by the way, in the light of what Helen has just said, that the German Communist Party reaction to being favorable to a government composed of the socialist parties and workers' organizations came out of the Luxembourg tradition. Not that Luxembourg, to my knowledge, ever said that, but that the people who formulated this response were Paul Levy and others of her close collaborators up to the formation of the German Communist movement. Now, the German Communists adopted a call for a workers' government of this type in 1921. The demand was included in a Comintern resolution that year, launching a campaign for a Workers' United Front. And this gave rise to a further wave of debate carrying forward into the Fourth World Congress and after. The central issue was whether the term workers' government was merely a pseudonym for the rule of workers' government councils under a communist leadership, what they called a dictatorship of the proletariat, a government of the Soviet type, which is just another way of saying a Soviet government. Or did workers' government represent a transition in the way I suggested at the beginning, a bridge from present conditions to Soviet rule? The Italian communist Amedeo Bordiga, for example, said that the transitional concept suggested the working class can take power, quote, in some way other than through the armed struggle for power. Ruth Fischer, who led the leftist minority in the German party, warned that the conception of revolution was being watered down by, quote, styling its hair in Western fashion, creating democratic transitional stages between what we have and what we aim for. Let's notice in passing that the two great protagonists on these questions in the German movement at that time were Ruth Fischer and Clara Zetkin, with a considerable achievement for women in communist leadership at a time when women had barely won the vote. Initially, Gregory Zinoviev, the president of the Comintern, had also expressed this view. He retracted it as the Congress opened, but continued to express the underlying thought in more guarded form. Leaders of the German party majority and Karl Radek, on the other hand, argued that the workers' government was not just a pseudonym for a workers' dictatorship in Soviet style, but was a point of transition toward it. Achievement of a workers' government can, I quote, lead to a phase of sharpened class struggles through which a proletarian dictatorship will ultimately emerge. That's Ernst Mayr talking. It will be parliamentary, as Mayr continued, only in a subordinate sense and must be carried by the masses. Karl Radek called such a government the starting point of a struggle for the dictatorship of the proletariat. During the editing process, the Congress text was progressively aligned with the transitional concept. The final text sharply counterposed it to a parliamentary-based, quote, bourgeois social democratic coalition, whether open or disguised. A workers' government can be sustained only by the struggle of the masses, the final draft states. Its enumerated tasks begin with, quote, arming the proletariat, and end with, quote, breaking the resistance of the counter-revolutionary bourgeoisie. It says something for the period that your immediate program would include arming the proletariat. Communists should stand ready to form a workers' government with non-communist workers' parties and workers' organizations, the resolution says, but only, quote, if there are guarantees that a workers' government will not carry out a genuine struggle against the bourgeoisie along the lines described above. In other words, the resolution was saying, we will not only call for this, we will not only support it, but under certain conditions we might even join it. That's interesting because that's ministerialism, if you will, you know. That is, participating in a government that's still ruling within the framework of a capitalist state, or at least active remnants of the capitalist state. Communists should stand, oh sorry, I did that before. And also subject to other safeguards, which I won't enumerate. This approach can be applied to workers' parties that do not oppose capitalism. Many years later, Trotsky wrote that revolutionaries should demand of all parties and organizations that base themselves on the workers and peasants and speak in their name, this passage I think is familiar to many of you, that they break politically from the bourgeoisie and enter upon the road of struggle for the workers' and farmers' government. So we could conceivably even say that of the NDP if we felt it was worthy of it. Now, the clarity of this position, however, so that's the position that was adopted by the Fourth Congress. Now, but there was more to it than that kind of complicate the situation. The clarity was muddied by Zinoviev, who also used the term workers' government to describe rule by, like, the British Labour Party of that time. That is, by bourgeois workers' parties, bourgeois in program, workers in composition, which, while introducing some reforms, acted as loyal administrators of the capitalist order. Zinoviev thought that a future Labour Party government in Britain could be that type of workers' government and could be the jumping-off point for revolutionizing the country. This position was opposed by the leaders of the German delegation, who secured passage of an amendment branding a workers' government of the Labour type as illusory. That's the third term in my title. The amendment also specified that the illusory liberal or social democratic workers' governments are not revolutionary workers' governments at all, but in reality hidden coalition governments between the bourgeoisie and anti-revolutionary leaders. That, so much for the Congress position. However, although adopted unanimously, the amendment was not incorporated into the published Russian version of the resolution, which has served as the basis for translations into English. As a result, English language comment on this issue, singling out Zinoviev's position for attack, has criticized the Congress for the very weakness that its delegates sought to remedy. In addition, there are three important questions around the workers' government which I think were not addressed in the Congress, and I'll say what they were. First, concerned the role of peasants. During the Fourth Congress debate, Vasil Kolarov, a senior delegate from Bulgaria, said that, quote, the workers' government is not posed in agrarian countries like the Balkans. Well, obviously, comrades didn't agree because they introduced an amendment saying that, referring to the possibility of a, quote, government of workers and the poorer peasants in regions such as the Balkans. The question was urgently posed in Bulgaria, then governed by a radical peasant party that was facing a threatened coup by rightist forces. No Congress delegate mentioned the situation in Bulgaria. Only a few months later, the Bulgarian communists refused to defend the peasant-based government against a coup with disastrous results. So, that was the first omission. The second failed discussion concerned the nature of workers' rule. The resolution's final text stated that, quote, a genuinely proletarian workers' government, in its pure form, can be embodied only in the Communist Party. The implication was that if communists allied with non-communist forces in a revolutionary government, this was only a temporary expedient until the communists were strong enough to rule alone. During the Congress, Leon Trotsky made a comment that implied a different approach. Describing the Bolsheviks' alliance with the left socialist revolutionaries in the first month of Soviet rule, Trotsky said that the left SRs had left this coalition on their own initiative, not the initiative of the Bolsheviks. In other words, Trotsky implied, but did not say, that he thinks it would have been good if that coalition had continued indefinitely. Nothing further was said on this point. As published, one could argue that the resolution fails to distinguish between workers' rule and the rule of the Communist Party. Now, my third omission is, nothing was said in the Congress regarding the government that might result by a revolution, from a revolution in the colonial and semi-colonial countries from the struggle for an anti-imperialist united front. One possibility and one conceivable form of a workers' government was the pre-1917 Bolshevik concept of a revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry. It was not mentioned. Now, the resolution contains a typology, a list of variants of workers' governments with 5 categories, which I won't enumerate. Go to my website. In each case, delegates were thinking of a specific situation. One of them referred to Britain, one referred to Germany, another referred to Germany, one referred to Balkans, and one referred to Soviet Russia. The resolution did not mention several earlier examples of workers' governments. The Paris Commune, the early Soviet Republic, of which Trotsky spoke, and the revolutionary regimes in Hungary and Bavaria in 1919. Now, Zinoviev stressed to Congress delegates, and I think when he said this he had us in mind, that this list was not complete and that other types of workers' governments would occur. He warned that in the search for a rigorous scientific definition, we might overlook the political side of the question. In other words, the Comintern's approach was not prescriptive, but empirical. Almost a century has passed since the Comintern debated the workers' government question. The revolutionary era that began in 1914 has passed away. We are headed towards new revolutions under new conditions. There is no equivalent today of the mass communist parties of the 1920s. I'm not sure there is even a real equivalent of the social democratic parties as they were then. The Comintern's decisions on governmental policy were rooted in a political environment that no longer exists. And yet I do believe they're important to us. The Comintern decisions should not be imposed mechanically on a vastly different reality, whether in Greece or elsewhere. The value of the workers' government position rather lies in alerting us to a possibility and expanding our framework of thought and imagination. This possibility is that even before the appearance of a Soviet-type network of workers' councils, even before the onset of socialist revolution, workers can find a way to pose the issue of governmental power and to struggle for it. Thank you.